Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 34th chapter of the book of Job. This is the second speech, the first of which ranged chapters 32 through 33 that we hear from Elihu, a young observer who has a lot to say, and he breaks in when the sustained stalemate suddenly descends into silence after Job's ninth and final speech. He chimes in, and he does have a lot of insight and a lot of input, and it is almost better in the narrative range of things to have Yahweh condescend after him. He approaches Job's dilemma from a different angle. First off, he makes his case known against Job's three comforters, misleadingly named, and their inability to answer him correctly or to prove him of sin. They were hurling libelous accusations of some secret sin, but their inability to explain the reason why he was suffering was tantamount to declaring Elohim wicked. So he is a defender of God. He doesn't have a personal dog in the personal fight. Job didn't insult him, so he says he's not going to indulge in the invective that the increasingly acrimonious invective that got worse with each round that we hear from them. But in the 33rd chapter, he makes his case against Job, and the remainder of his speech, all the way to the 37th chapter, continues. He's addressing Job in this and we read in important detail in the second verse of the 32nd chapter that his wrath burned against Job because he had declared himself right rather than Elohim. So he had justified himself at the expense of Elohim, much in the same way that their inability, Job's three friends' inability to answer him correctly or satisfactorily was done so at the expense of Elohim. But, you know, he says a few rhetorical devices. He establishes that his motives are clean. He looks Job in the eye as an equal in the 6th verse. But then he says in the 14th verse that God speaks, but people don't always listen. So there is a spiritual antenna that we delved on more extensively in that lesson. We actually took the most recent lesson from the 19th verse, and he does speak sophisticatedly of suffering as a form of revelation. This constitutes an authentic original thought. That's some perspective that is not expressed anywhere else in the Bible, and this is the earliest chronological writing of one. So pain functions to the physical body much in the same way that guilt functions to the spiritual side. When we are guilty at doing something, that is the equivalent of pain that warns us against doing something again. But if we stubbornly persist in just looking out for number one, pursuing pleasure and gluttony as its own sake, then we will invite bodily pains and consequences on this. And this is just God's way of telling us to repent, and his aim is restoration. So the 23rd verse, if there is an angel for him, a mediator, one among 1,000, to show man his straightness, then he shows grace to him and says, release him from going to the pit. I have found an atonement. This is the mediator that Job had longed for, I think in the 9th chapter, 33rd verse. I could be wrong, but it is the form of an angel, because they are pre-Christian people. They have no consent, although Job does express faith for the one in whom he has not yet seen, the Redeemer, who he has faith in the resurrection in the 19th chapter. But it's the angel performing the intermediary role, but also the atonement. This is necessary in order for any human being to be declared right, to be justified in the heavens before him whose justice is perfect and righteousness is undeniable. The atonement was satisfied. The atonement, it's a lowercase a here. We often refer to the atonement, that of Yahshua Messiah, as the capital letter atonement. But in any case, an atonement would have been an innocent animal in the Old Covenant. This was an atonement sacrifice. It was the vicarious assumption of the penalties of one's sin, which is, of course, death. So an innocent animal had to be sacrificed in response to sin, but that all went away with the full and final atonement. Henceforth, all animal sacrifices are eternally obsolete. Let his flesh become fresher than a child, and let him return to the days of youth. So this is also another allusion to the resurrection that we find in the book of Job. He speaks of the flesh being renewed. The resurrected bodies that we will receive and inherit will be designed to withstand an eternity, unlike the fleshly vessels we now inhabit, which are designed to decay and perish. But everything's going to be continually new. The old will pass away. The new will become the ever-present reality. We will always be excited, and there will be newness and youth because we're not going to age in this blessed abode. He prays to Eloah, and he accepts him, and he sees his face with joy and restores to man his righteousness. The fact that he has to restore man to his righteousness means that man is on his own and in himself unrighteous. So it has to be restored to him, and this is done vicariously through the imputation of the righteous one, of the sinless one, who was our atonement. But the process, as Elihu describes it, consists of one who is in the arms of an angel, praying out, reaching out desperately to Eloah and for the acceptance, and then his request is answered. So there is a mediator, there is an atonement, and he does make this possible. 28th verse, he has redeemed my soul from going down to the pit, and my life sees the light. This is also can be interpreted as a reference to the resurrection. The pit is hell. The pit is the Sheol, the Hebrew Sheol, the land of no return, the land of darkness. This is, but the blessings and benefits of having been redeemed from such an unenviable eternal condition is that our life will see the lights. We'll bask in the light. We'll exude the light. And in the New Jerusalem, there is no need for a sun or a moon, for Yahweh and the Lamb provide that life in superabundance. See, El does all these twice, 3 times with the man. He in the 14th verse, he says, El speaks once or twice, one does not notice it. So this is even more than frequent than God speaking to man. So that's a Hebrew idiom it's just a way of saying a few, but more than one or two. To bring back his soul from the pit, to be enlightened with the light of the living. There's that light of the living. Light and life are connected closely. The author of life is the one who is the light, and we are enlightened, and we can bask in the radiance of his light that we are commanded to reflect, even that we have on the earth. But he closes this chapter by just saying, pay attention. That's his way of saying that I have something significant to say. So Elihu is not a brash young man, but he is confident in his ability to speak wisdom and to communicate it effectively. 34th verse, first verse, lesson itself. And Elihu responded and said, so this marks the distinct second speech. Earlier I described that the 6 chapters consist of 4 speeches. So he addresses Job's friends and then Job himself, but there's no explicit indicator of the chronological time elapsed from the first to the second, but it is him assuming the momentum of speaking once more. Hear my words, you wise men. Give ear to me, and you who have knowledge. Earlier in the 21st verse, he said that he was not going to flatter any man, but here he breaks that. He's addressing his audience, telling them what they want to hear, that they are wise, and if you are wise, you will understand. You will know and understand what it is that I'm saying. But he's paying them mock due deference. He earlier said that age does not always come with wisdom in the 32nd chapter, but he's telling them to pay attention, give ear to me, lend me your ears. What I have to say is significant. This is a not uncommon device employed not only by Job, but also his 3 misleadingly named comforters, all of who claim to have knowledge and wisdom and righteousness, but none of them were perfect, none of them are omniscient, none of them knew what took place in the second, including Elihu and Job himself. None of them, and the 3 comforters, they did not know. They were not privy to the scenes and the machinations of the first 2 chapters, which consisted of Satan goading Yahweh into a bet. He successfully tempted him, but Yahweh also knew that Job would emerge triumphant in it. So that was the greater reason for Job's suffering, to give the world and history a witness that even though all the world will forsake him, if they take everything away, one man will not. For the ear tries words as the palate tastes food. Job said something similar. Now the ear is a sensory organ which detects the physical sound, and the taste, the mouth, our tongues are what enable us to have the physical sensation of taste. So the palate, that judges the worth. He's not talking about food itself, but words here. So he's saying that, you will taste, the words that I speak will sound sweet. They will be beneficial. There will be nutrients and sustenance in them. He's not trying to attack Job as a secret sinner. His beef with Job, his dispute with him, his contention was that Job had dishonored God as had his three friends. So he's on no one's side but God's side, although he does direct a disproportionate amount of attention to Job rather than the other three. Let us choose what is right for us. Let us know among us what is good. So he's essentially flattering them to say that self-evidently my words will make sense, that they will click with you, and you will know the goodness of what I speak when I speak it, by the way I speak it, and also the concepts communicated will be unmistakably and undeniably good. But he's summoning them to participate. Let's choose. We all have to choose. We make thousands of decisions literally throughout the day as a matter of course, and each of those actions that we have to make decisions does amount to choosing what is right for us. Now, the sin mentality, the enslaving power of sin, convinces us that what is right for us will give us immediate gratification, but that's dangerously potential for sin there. But our conscience, the one that provokes guilt much as the body produces pain, and for the same reason that we earlier described, will be able to tell what is good for us. So our conscience will not be conflicted when we choose what is good. For Job has said, I am righteous, but El has taken away my rights. This is a paraphrase. The concepts communicated, if not the words aren't identical, but the concept is, Job did insist on his own righteousness, and in fact he even went to the sinful extreme of self-righteousness. So Job did not suffer because he sinned, but he certainly sinned in his suffering. The most recent occasion is the 37th verse of the 31st chapter. I would approach him like a prince. So he has this presumption that he's so righteous that he can approach the just one who had inflicted this justice on him and get vindicated. So that's just a species and an example. But El has taken away my rights. Now, El did not, he permitted, he enabled, and he allowed Satan to take away his health, his wealth, and his children. So his rights at this point, he was just praying for an audience, the privilege of prayer, a prayer answered. No one was listening to him, but Yahweh's ears were attentively observing, as were all the angels in heaven and in hell. The demons would have been gathered at hell. Satan has heavenly access, or would have been watching this event. Would I lie concerning my right? My wound is uncurable, without transgression. There is such a thing as a wound that is uncurable, physically speaking. This is going to degenerate and decay into death. It is an irreversible, not in remission, but in the irreversible direction that works out its natural cause and effect consequence, which is of course death. But he's spiritually speaking, no wound is uncurable, no sin is beyond redemption, no sin cannot be forgiven, but there are certain conditions to meet to attain that forgiveness, one of which is a genuine sorrow of the sin, and not only for the pain it caused you, but for the pain it caused others and for the pain that it caused God. But there is a remedy, there is a panacea, there is redemption, there is atonement for us. What man is like Job, who drinks mocking like water, who goes in company with the workers of wickedness and walks with men of wickedness? Now he's mimicking the concepts communicated by Job's three antagonists. Of course, Job wouldn't have thought himself as mocking them. As far as he was concerned, they were mocking him. They were belittling the fact that he had everything and lost, and now they try to take away the one thing he had left, which was his innocence and his integrity and his righteousness. So the two things that Satan could not take from Job is the faith and the integrity. Job maintained these all to the end. But workers of wickedness, they insisted that he had some secret sin, that he was in league with the children of Satan, the workers, and he was tainted by his illicit association with them. So he was a sinner, and sinners gravitate among their own. For he has said, it does not profit a man that he takes delight in Elohim. Job did say something like this. He was beginning to question the very reason that one should live in righteousness, because prior to this point he had been rewarded in proportion to his righteousness, and he says in the 29th chapter he had he thought that he would live like this forever. Life would just keep getting better and better and better, that he would just keep growing and keep prospering at the rate that he was. But he had to have a rude interruption to take him to the ground, to the level, in order to cultivate the foul weather faith, which is necessary for the equation and the balance in having a faith that is whole, complete, and total. Therefore listen to me, you men of heart. Far be it from El to do wickedly, and from El Shaddai to commit unrighteousness. He is an intrinsically righteous being. That means everything he is and everything he does is righteous by connection to him. So for him to inflict this justice without some greater injustice, without some greater purpose in mind, would have been tantamount to injustice on his behalf. But he doesn't explain his purpose, and he does not owe us an explanation. He is a God of promises, not of explanations. He promises Job twofold restoration and the same number of children that he had in the end, in his health, and just, he was rejoiced, by all the men in the town. But he is the righteous one, apart from whom we have no righteousness to call our own, and in fact our best works and our best days are likened to filthy rags before him as without blemish, by the prophet Isaiah in the 64th chapter and the 6th verse of the book which bears his name. For he repays man's work to him, and makes man to find a reward according to his path. The ultimate harvest comes with the second coming. That's when the sheep are going to be separated from the goats. So he's speaking of a judgment here. The vindication and the retaliation and the retribution does not always visit the wicked in this lifetime. In some form, it usually does, but some people do prosper and get away with abusing and exploiting the poor and make it all the way through life without inviting adverse consequences. This is rare, but it does happen, but they cannot hope to escape the justice of the judgment, where all wrongs will be righted and everyone will be rewarded or deprived according to their works. This is consistent with the teaching in the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 3rd chapter. But he does provide a path, and he does provide the light, and he does provide the guidance. We have to walk on his path to attain our reward, and the path, the road to salvation is straight and narrow. Wide and broad is the way to death, damnation, destruction, and hell. So we have to walk the path and make sure that it's his. We must submit our wills and align it with his. So the purpose of prayer is not to dictate our selfish desires to him. It is for the discernment to know and the courage to enact what his will is for us. The truth is, El does not do wickedly, and El Shaddai does not twist justice. This is, sometimes it seems, when someone loses a child, a child, an 8-year-old child or anything else, or loses a mother or father prematurely, a lot of them do tend to blame God, because if there's this omnipotent sovereign being in the universe, why would he not intervene and prevent this stuff? And the answer is that he's not obligated to. He is a God of love, and as such, he gives us free agency, and he will not intervene unless it's for a greater purpose according to his wise design. So these are tests of faith, which distort the conception of an all-just, all-loving God, but it is part of his love that gives us the free agency, which does not interfere, and he is a father. He will not force any of his children to come to him. But the injustice, the fact that injustice is rampant on the earth is another cause of question and skepticism towards this all-loving, all-powerful, all-just God in the sky. And this is the result and consequence of our own mismanaged and abused free agency. But in Elohim there is no wickedness, and to accuse him of wickedness is like criticizing the novelist for not resolving the plot at the midway point. So all wrongs will be righted in the end, the final judgment, the harvest that awaits us at the end of the age. That's when everything's going to be set in order. Who has assigned him to the earth, and who has laid out all the world? So the obvious, self-evident answer to these rhetorical questions is himself. He is not only the creator, but he retains a sovereign omnipresence throughout the overseer and mannership of not only the earth but his entire universe. He's the only one who could do that. So it is impossible for him to duplicate his powers and their full perfections of his attributes towards any others. And who has laid out the world? Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? This is the question that he eventually asked Yahweh himself, Job, in the 4th verse of the 38th chapter. So the only one who laid down the world was the one who was in the beginning, before the beginning, and launched the beginning, and all that has been since. If he applies his heart to him, should he gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would expire together, and man return to dust. Applying our heart, that means we have to love, worship, obey him with all our faculties and all our capacities, the heart, the mind, the might. But the heart is the center of will, thoughts, emotions, and volition. So we get at the heart of every problem lays the problem of the heart. So if we get our hearts aligned with his and apply it to his heart, then he's also speaking of a spiritual resurrection. Gather to himself his spirit and his breath. The spirit is the life-giving, animating force. Genesis 2:7, he breathed the breath of life into him, and that's what gave the spirit. And 1 Corinthians 15 speaks of the spirit being of another realm, but ultimately the life source of us all. And the flesh would expire. He's talking about death. This is the dreaded, inescapable destiny. And man returns to the dust. Now our physical mortal frames do return to the dust. From the dust we came, and from the dust we remain. We return, Genesis 2:7. So our physical bodies, as they now are, share a lot of the physical component properties of the chemicals of dust. And and when we return, our skin vanishes and ultimately ascends into dust and just scatters itself. And this reminds me of Ecclesiastes 12:7, where Solomon endorses a spiritual resurrection where the flesh dies, but the spirit returns to the God who gave it. If you understand, hear this. Give ear to the sounds of my word. This is just another way of saying, pay attention, look at me, listen to me. I got something to say important. You're going to be wowed by my wisdom. You should really pay attention. You just have to preface the significance you say with the worthy introduction to let them know that what they are about to hear will be mind exploding. Should the one who hates justice govern, or would you declare a most righteous one wicked? So for him to be unjust would constitutionally disqualify his right to govern. The sovereign one is sovereign because he is just, intrinsically so. So in him no injustice dwells. So for God to not be just, he would cede his right to govern. He would cease to be God. That's what Elihu is communicating. So of course God does not hate justice. He loves justice, and it breaks his heart to see the injustices committed by his wayward and fallen creatures. So he does hate that, but he does not hate justice itself. And in fact, it delights him, and it's a delight and a joy for him to witness the rare moments when we correct and amend an injustice and make things right. We are doing his work when we do that. But he takes it personally that just the offense that declaring God wicked, that is something that Job did imply. He was a just man. He did nothing to deserve the calamity that was visited upon him in a twinkle of an eye. And because he was just and this injustice was supernaturally sent, that means God is unjust. But, Elihu takes that very personal. He is a loyal guardian of God. But what's interesting is that when Yahweh condescends in the whirlwind, he denounces Job's three comforters, but Elihu is not mentioned, and he affirms and vindicates Job. Who shall say to a king, Baal, to nobles, wicked one? Baal is that is satanic connotations, and to declare a king, that would have cost you your head in the form of structure of absolute monarchies. To declare nobles wicked one, that would have been presumptuous for a commoner to speak ill of their socioeconomic superiors and societal superiors in such a manner and way. Who is not partial to princes, nor regards the rich more than the poor, for they are all the works of his hands. So in him there is no impartiality. This is communicated in Deuteronomy 1:17. The Hebrews were commanded to reflect his lack of partiality in the administering and execution of their justice. Sadly, the natural man naturally rewards the rich above the poor, and James speaks of this in his second chapter. He describes a realistic hypothetical in which a congregant will tell the poor person to shoo away in order to make room for the rich, because they count on his patronage. But what he doesn't know is that what they don't know is that they are also courting someone with the power to harm them, and they are blaspheming in the act. So we have to treat the rich and the poor alike, and because they all spring from the same fingerprint. There is nothing more special or valuable to the rich, certainly in the ways of the world, but in the ways of heaven, that doesn't mean nearly as much, if anything at all, that it does mean here. Rich and poor, you are all the crown, whether you are rich or whether you are poor, you are still the crown glory of his creation, and as such you have intrinsic worth that is equal to any other human being. In a moment they die. In the middle of the night, the people are shaken and pass away, and the mighty are taken away with a hand. This speaks of the suddenness of death. No one can predict it. No one can control it. No one can prevent it. It comes to us all equally, and it comes to us. It makes us all equal when it comes, but even though it is the great equalizer, it does not come to us all in the same manner. There are literally thousands of ways to die, but in the moment that it happens, the ideal conditions of one death, the way we all plan it and like it, would to die peacefully in our own sleep, thus miss the anticipated agony of the death experience. But passing away, that it comes to us all, and even the mighty, the rich, the strong in the world, the noble, the powerful, the privileged, they're going to meet the same end as the poor, so they are nothing special. Their wealth means something in this world, but not so much. It cannot prevent their day of the death, and they cannot take any of it with them there. So that we're going to close this lesson. This marks the end of a paragraph, and this chapter is 37 verses, so this was the best way to divide it. We'll pick up this lesson at a future time. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.